All lies will be exposed. That's all. And anyone who takes that the wrong way, know why they take it the wrong way.
What if one of the most influential figures in music never disappeared at all, but became something completely different right in front of our eyes? For years, Pharrell Williams has been celebrated as a creative genius, a hitmaker capable of shaping entire generations with a single beat. From chart-dominating records to billion-dollar fashion partnerships, his rise seemed unstoppable. But lately, some fans have started asking a question that refuses to go away. Why does Pharrell feel different now? The answer might be far more complicated than anyone expected. When Katt Williams began making explosive comments about how power really works behind the scenes of the entertainment industry, many people brushed them off as just another controversy. But others started connecting dots they had never noticed before. Suddenly, old interviews, career moves, public appearances, and major business deals began looking very different. Was Pharrell simply evolving as an artist? Was he making smart business decisions? Or did something happen after reaching the highest levels of fame and influence that changed the direction of his entire career? The deeper you look, the stranger the story becomes. Because this isn't just about music, fashion, or celebrity culture. It's about power, influence, and what some believe is the hidden cost of staying at the very top. And once you see the pattern, it's almost impossible to unsee it. Long before the rumors, the theories, and the endless online debates, Pharrell Williams was already doing something that almost nobody else in the music business could do. He wasn't just making hits. He was changing the sound of popular music itself. Think back to the early 2000s. Radio stations across America were packed with songs that carried a certain energy, a certain bounce, a certain style that instantly grabbed your attention. Whether listeners realized it or not, Pharrell Williams was often somewhere behind the scenes, helping create those moments. Alongside Chad Hugo, he helped build the Neptunes into one of the most influential production teams in modern music history. Their fingerprints seemed to be everywhere. Major artists wanted their sound. Record labels wanted their sound. Fans couldn't get enough of their sound. And that's what made Pharrell different. Most producers stayed behind the curtain. They created the music, collected their credits, and moved on to the next project. But Pharrell wasn't satisfied with simply being the person in the studio. He was becoming something bigger. As his influence grew, so did his visibility. Suddenly, people weren't just talking about records he produced. They were talking about the way he dressed, the brands he launched, the ideas he promoted, and the culture he helped shape. He wasn't following trends. He was creating them. That's why his rise fascinated so many people. Pharrell didn't fit the traditional blueprint that the entertainment industry often expected. While many artists leaned into familiar images and predictable formulas, he seemed determined to do the opposite. He showed up looking different. He sounded different. He thought differently. And somehow it worked. In fact, it worked so well that Pharrell became one of the rare figures capable of moving between completely different worlds. One day, he could be producing records. The next day, he could be influencing fashion. Then he'd be involved in design, business, branding, or cultural conversations. The boundaries that normally separated those industries didn't seem to apply to him. That level of influence doesn't happen by accident. It takes talent. It takes timing. But it also takes something else: power. And according to many people who've studied the entertainment industry, power is where everything starts getting complicated. Because reaching the top is one thing. Staying there is something entirely different. As Pharrell's profile continued to grow, his reputation evolved from successful producer to cultural architect. His decisions carried weight. His taste influenced markets. His approval could elevate brands and artists alike. That kind of influence is valuable, extremely valuable. And whenever someone becomes that valuable, people begin paying attention. Not just fans, not just media outlets. The people operating at the highest levels of business and entertainment start paying attention too. Years later, when Katt Williams began speaking publicly about power structures inside Hollywood and the entertainment world, some listeners started looking back at careers like Pharrell's through a completely different lens. Not because Katt mentioned every detail directly, but because of the questions his comments inspired. questions that still circulate online today. Questions about what happens when creative people become powerful enough to influence millions. Questions about what happens when talent turns into global influence. Questions about what happens when somebody becomes too important to ignore. And that's where this story starts taking an unexpected turn. Because if you compare the Pharrell many people remember from his earlier years to the version the public sees today, the differences are impossible to miss. The younger Pharrell often felt unpredictable. There was an edge to him, a sense that he was willing to take creative risks simply because he wanted to see what would happen. His music reflected that mindset. His image reflected that mindset. Even his public appearances carried that energy. He never quite knew what direction he would go next. That unpredictability became part of his appeal. Fans admired the fact that he didn't seem interested in fitting neatly into anyone else's expectations. But then something interesting happened. As the years passed, Pharrell's world grew larger. The opportunities became bigger. The partnerships became more prestigious. The rooms he entered became more powerful. And with each new step upward, some fans noticed subtle changes. At first, those changes seemed natural. After all, people mature. Artists evolve. Careers shift. That's normal. But eventually, certain observers began asking whether they were witnessing evolution or something else entirely. The conversation became even louder when Pharrell's influence expanded deeper into luxury fashion. For many people, this was proof of his brilliance. A producer from Virginia had managed to conquer industries that once seemed completely unrelated to music. It was an incredible accomplishment. But for others, those same achievements raised additional questions. Why did the rebellious outsider appear increasingly comfortable within institutions that traditionally rewarded conformity? Why did the unpredictable innovator seem more polished than ever? Why did the artist who once thrived on disruption appear increasingly associated with stability and refinement? Again, none of these questions proved anything, but they fueled curiosity. And curiosity has a way of growing, especially online. The internet loves patterns. Whether those patterns are real or imagined, people naturally search for them. Soon, discussions about Pharrell's transformation began spreading across social media platforms, podcasts, forums, and entertainment channels. Every interview was analyzed. Every public appearance was examined. Every career move became part of a larger conversation. Then came one of the most talked about symbols in Pharrell's public journey. The famous oversized hat. To some people, it was simply a memorable fashion choice. Nothing more. But others saw it differently. They viewed it as a representation of a particular version of Pharrell. The fearless creative. The eccentric visionary. The guy who seemed completely comfortable standing apart from everyone else. That image became iconic. Years later, people still talk about it. Not because it was just a hat, but because of what many believed it represented. Individuality, confidence, creative freedom, the willingness to ignore expectations. And according to some observers, the gradual disappearance of that version of Pharrell became symbolic as well. Again, nobody was claiming a hat could explain an entire career. But symbols matter, especially in celebrity culture. They help people tell stories. And the story many people began telling was that Pharrell's journey wasn't simply about success. It was about transformation. The question was whether that transformation happened naturally, or whether the pressures that come with extraordinary success played a larger role than anyone realized. That's where Katt Williams enters the conversation. Because Katt has spent years making controversial claims about how power operates behind closed doors. Whether people agree with him or not, one thing is undeniable. His comments make people think. They make people revisit old assumptions. They make people ask uncomfortable questions. And when some listeners applied those ideas to Pharrell's career, they arrived at a theory that quickly gained attention. A theory suggesting that the entertainment industry doesn't always eliminate talented people who become influential. Sometimes it does something else. Sometimes it embraces them. Sometimes it elevates them. Sometimes it places them in positions where their influence becomes even greater. But according to this theory, elevation can come with expectations. Unspoken expectations. Invisible expectations. The kind nobody writes down. The kind everybody understands. Whether that theory is true remains a matter of debate. But what happened next only intensified the discussion. Because as Pharrell's success reached levels most artists can only dream about, some people became convinced they were witnessing evidence of something much bigger than a normal career evolution. And the deeper they looked, the more questions they found. Questions that would eventually lead directly to the most controversial claims surrounding Pharrell Williams and the hidden price of remaining at the top. By the time these conversations started gaining momentum online, Pharrell Williams had already achieved something most entertainers never come close to accomplishing. He wasn't just surviving in an industry known for constantly replacing its stars. He was thriving decade after decade. That's what made the situation so fascinating. In Hollywood, careers rise and fall every year. Artists dominate headlines one moment and seem forgotten the next. Entire trends appear and disappear before most people even realize they existed. Yet somehow Pharrell remained relevant through multiple generations. For many fans, that level of longevity was proof of exceptional talent. For critics and conspiracy-minded observers, it became something else entirely. A mystery. The more people looked around the entertainment landscape, the more unusual Pharrell's position appeared. Artists with similar influence had experienced public feuds, controversies, career setbacks, or dramatic fallouts at some point along the way. But Pharrell seemed different. His image remained remarkably clean. His business relationships remained strong. His reputation stayed largely intact. And that's where some of the theories began accelerating. Because when Katt Williams started speaking about the entertainment industry, one recurring idea stood out to many listeners. According to Katt's perspective, the most powerful systems don't always destroy valuable people. Sometimes they protect them. That concept immediately caught people's attention. After all, most stories about Hollywood focus on conflict. We hear about celebrities getting blacklisted, careers collapsing, and public scandals destroying reputations overnight. But Katt's suggestion pointed toward a different possibility. What if some individuals become so valuable that removing them would make no sense at all? What if the goal isn't destruction? What if the goal is preservation? That question completely changed how some viewers interpreted Pharrell's journey. Instead of asking why he was still successful, they started asking how he remained successful for so long. The distinction may seem small, but it changes everything. Because once that question enters your mind, every career move begins to look different. Take Pharrell's increasing presence within luxury fashion. Most headlines framed it as a brilliant business evolution. And honestly, there was plenty of evidence supporting that view. He had the creativity. He had the influence. He had the cultural reach. It made sense. But another group of observers saw something deeper. They argued that Pharrell's role was changing. In their view, he was moving from cultural disruptor to cultural representative. That may sound like a subtle difference, but it's actually massive. A disruptor challenges systems. A representative operates within them. And according to this theory, the entertainment industry prefers representatives over disruptors. Not because representatives are less talented, but because they're more predictable, more manageable, more aligned with existing structures. Again, none of this was presented as proven fact. It was speculation built on observation. Yet those observations kept piling up. Fans who had followed Pharrell since the early years remembered the experimental producer who seemed obsessed with pushing boundaries. He created sounds people weren't expecting. He took creative risks that could have easily failed. Sometimes they did fail, but he kept experimenting anyway. That willingness to risk failure became a huge part of his identity. Then, as time passed, some listeners felt his public image became increasingly polished. The rough edges appeared softer. The unpredictability seemed reduced. The rebellion felt quieter. Whether that perception was accurate or not, it became a major talking point. And the timing only fueled the discussion further. Because while these conversations were growing online, Pharrell's profile was reaching new heights. Major fashion houses embraced him. Corporate partnerships expanded. Prestigious opportunities kept appearing. His influence wasn't shrinking. It was increasing, which led many people back to another question inspired by Katt Williams. If the entertainment industry truly punishes those who refuse to cooperate, why did Pharrell continue ascending? The answer proposed by some theorists was simple: because he wasn't fighting the system, he was navigating it. And that distinction became the foundation for countless debates. One side argued that Pharrell was simply making intelligent decisions. They pointed out that maturity naturally changes people. Success creates new responsibilities. Leadership requires different skills than rebellion. Maybe Pharrell wasn't becoming less authentic. Maybe he was becoming more strategic. That explanation certainly sounded reasonable, but others weren't convinced. They believed something more significant had happened behind the scenes. Not necessarily a conspiracy in the dramatic sense. Not secret meetings or bizarre plots. Something much simpler. Adaptation. The idea that every major industry has rules. Some written, most unwritten. And those who rise to the highest levels eventually learn exactly where those boundaries exist. Once you understand those boundaries, you gain access to opportunities unavailable to everyone else. You gain influence, resources, protection, power. But according to this theory, there's a trade-off. The trade-off isn't money. It's freedom. Freedom to speak without consequences. Freedom to challenge powerful interests. Freedom to create without considering larger expectations. Whether those limitations are real or imagined remains heavily debated. Yet many observers believe they could see evidence of that process unfolding in real time, especially when comparing Pharrell's public image across different eras of his career. The younger version seemed comfortable existing outside conventional expectations. The newer version appeared perfectly positioned inside some of the world's most influential institutions. Again, neither version was necessarily better, just different, and difference invites questions. Questions eventually became the central theme of the entire conversation. Why did Pharrell rarely engage in public controversies? Why did he avoid many of the explosive industry conflicts that consumed other celebrities? Why did his public statements often remain measured and diplomatic? Why did he appear increasingly associated with stability rather than disruption? Some people viewed those traits as signs of wisdom. Others viewed them as signs of caution. A few interpreted them as evidence of something much larger. That's where the phrase controlled success began appearing more frequently in online discussions. Not because anyone could prove such a thing existed, but because the concept resonated with audiences already suspicious of powerful institutions. The theory suggested that extraordinary success sometimes comes with invisible expectations. Nobody forces compliance. Nobody issues threats. Instead, people simply learn the consequences of crossing certain lines. Over time, they adjust their behavior accordingly. According to supporters of this idea, the process becomes almost automatic. You know which topics create problems. You know which conversations generate backlash. You know which doors close when certain subjects are discussed. So eventually, you stop testing those boundaries. Not because you're afraid, because you're practical. And this is exactly where the Pharrell debate became especially complicated. Because even critics acknowledged his intelligence. Nobody seriously argued that he didn't understand how the industry worked. In fact, many believed he understood it better than almost anyone, which created another intriguing possibility. What if Pharrell wasn't being controlled? What if he was making calculated decisions based on decades of experience? What if everything people interpreted as evidence of outside influence was actually evidence of strategic thinking? That possibility made the story far more complex. Now, there wasn't just one explanation. There were several. Maybe Pharrell had changed naturally. Maybe success had transformed his priorities. Maybe experience had made him more careful. Or maybe Katt Williams was pointing towards something most people still weren't seeing. As those competing theories spread, one fact remained impossible to ignore. Pharrell wasn't fading away. He wasn't disappearing. He wasn't losing relevance. Quite the opposite. He seemed stronger than ever, more connected than ever, more respected than ever. And for some observers, that became the most important clue of all. Because according to the ideas Katt Williams often discusses, true power isn't always visible. Sometimes it reveals itself through who remains standing while everyone else struggles to survive. The longer people examined Pharrell's career through that lens, the more divided opinions became. Some saw a master strategist. Others saw a symbol of adaptation. Others believed they were witnessing proof of a hidden system operating exactly as Katt described. But regardless of where people stood, one thing became impossible to deny. The conversation had evolved far beyond music. It was now about power itself. Who has it? How they keep it? And what someone might have to sacrifice in order to remain at the very top for decades. And that's when the most controversial question of all began taking shape. Not whether Pharrell had changed. Almost everyone agreed he had. The real question was why. And according to the people who believe Katt Williams was exposing something bigger than celebrity gossip, the answer wasn't hidden in what Pharrell said publicly. It was hidden in everything he chose not to say. That theory would soon become the center of the entire debate and lead directly into the most explosive claims surrounding his career. By this point, the discussion surrounding Pharrell Williams had moved far beyond music charts, fashion headlines, and celebrity success stories. The conversation had become something much larger. It was now centered on a question that has followed powerful figures throughout history. What does someone give up in order to stay at the top? For many people, that question sounds dramatic. After all, when they look at Pharrell's life, they see achievements most people can only dream about. They see awards, influence, wealth, respect, and a career that has survived multiple generations of change. From the outside, it appears to be the perfect success story. But according to the theories inspired by Katt Williams' comments, the most important parts of the story aren't visible from the outside. They're hidden beneath the surface. That's where the debate becomes uncomfortable. Because the argument isn't that Pharrell failed. The argument isn't that he disappeared. The argument isn't even that he lost his talent. In fact, even many of the people asking questions would admit the exact opposite. Pharrell still possesses the creativity that made him famous. He still has the vision. He still has the influence. He still has the ability to shape culture. The theory suggests something different. It suggests that the talent remained exactly the same while the direction changed. And for some observers, that's the detail they find impossible to ignore. Look at the way many fans describe Pharrell's earlier years. They often talk about experimentation. They talk about risks. They talk about a creator who seemed completely comfortable stepping into unknown territory. There was an unpredictability to him, a feeling that he could wake up one morning and completely reinvent a sound that millions of people would eventually copy. That version of Pharrell felt impossible to categorize. He wasn't following a blueprint. He was creating one. But over time, some fans began feeling that the wild unpredictability had slowly been replaced by precision. The risks appeared smaller. The image appeared cleaner. The messaging appeared safer. Again, none of this proves anything. People change. Careers evolve. Success brings new responsibilities. Those explanations remain entirely possible. Yet the questions persisted because of one simple fact. The transformation seemed to happen alongside increasing levels of influence and institutional power. And that's where Katt Williams' broader message entered the conversation once again. Throughout various interviews and public appearances, Katt has repeatedly suggested that the entertainment industry operates according to rules most people never see. Not official rules, not written rules, invisible rules, rules understood by the people who benefit from them. According to that worldview, success isn't always about who has the most talent. Sometimes it's about who understands the system best. Sometimes it's about who learns how to navigate it. Sometimes it's about knowing exactly where the boundaries exist and making sure you never cross them. Whether people agree with Katt or not, that perspective caused many listeners to reevaluate careers like Pharrell's. Not because they suddenly believed every theory, but because they started viewing success through a different lens. Instead of asking how someone became powerful, they started asking how someone stayed powerful. And those are very different questions. Becoming successful often requires creativity. Staying successful often requires strategy. The people who support these theories argue that strategy eventually becomes more important than creativity itself. Because once you reach a certain level, the game changes. You're no longer competing for attention. You're managing influence. You're protecting relationships. You're maintaining access to rooms that very few people ever enter. And according to this way of thinking, access always comes with expectations. Not necessarily direct demands. Not necessarily threats. Something much more subtle. An understanding. A recognition of how things work. Over time, supporters of this theory claim that many public figures begin adjusting themselves without anyone needing to tell them what to do. They understand which topics create problems. They understand which opinions create resistance. They understand which battles are worth fighting and which ones could cost them everything. As a result, they become increasingly careful, increasingly calculated, increasingly disciplined. And that's where some people believe Pharrell's story fits into the larger picture. Not as a victim, not as a puppet, but as someone who understands the rules better than most. That distinction matters, because one of the most interesting parts of this debate is the possibility that Pharrell's position wasn't forced upon him at all. What if it was a choice? What if decades of experience taught him exactly how the system operates? What if he consciously decided that maintaining influence was more valuable than challenging the structures around him? That possibility creates a much more complicated story. Now the discussion isn't about good versus evil. It's about trade-offs. Trade-offs that many powerful people face. The trade-off between freedom and stability. The trade-off between rebellion and access. The trade-off between saying everything you think and preserving everything you've built. Those trade-offs exist in many industries, not just entertainment. But when they involve celebrities, the public gets a front row seat. That's why Pharrell's career continues to attract so much attention. People aren't just watching an artist. They're watching a case study in longevity, a case study in survival, a case study in what it takes to remain relevant while countless others disappear. And according to the theories surrounding Katt Williams' comments, survival itself may be one of the biggest clues. Because Katt's critics and supporters often agree on one thing. The entertainment industry can be ruthless. Careers collapse overnight. Reputations get destroyed. Opportunities vanish. Yet Pharrell has remained remarkably steady through decades of change. For some people, that's evidence of intelligence and professionalism. For others, it's evidence that he learned how to operate within the system more effectively than almost anyone else. Either way, the result is the same. He's still here, still influential, still respected, still positioned near the center of major cultural conversations. And that reality brings us to the question at the heart of this entire story. If Pharrell truly understands how power works, what does he know that the public doesn't? What has he seen over the course of his career? What conversations has he heard? What realities has he learned to navigate? And perhaps most importantly, what has he chosen to keep private? Those questions don't have easy answers. In fact, they may never have answers. Because unlike internet theories, real life is rarely simple. People evolve for countless reasons. Success changes priorities. Age changes perspectives. Experience changes behavior. Any of those factors could explain Pharrell's transformation. Yet that uncertainty is exactly why the debate continues. The mystery remains unresolved. Some people see growth. Others see adaptation. Others see evidence supporting everything Katt Williams has been saying about power, influence, and the hidden rules governing the entertainment world. And maybe that's why this story continues capturing attention. Not because anyone has definitive proof, but because it forces people to confront an uncomfortable possibility. The possibility that reaching the top and staying there are two completely different challenges. One requires talent. The other may require something else entirely. Today, Pharrell Williams stands as one of the most successful figures in modern entertainment. His influence stretches across music, fashion, business, and culture. His achievements are undeniable. Yet despite all that success, the questions remain. Has he simply matured into a smarter version of himself? Has he mastered the game better than everyone else? Or does his journey reveal something deeper about how power truly operates behind the scenes? The answer depends on who you ask. But one thing is certain. The conversation sparked by Katt Williams isn't disappearing anytime soon. Because the more people examine stories like Pharrell's, the more they begin wondering whether success comes with costs that the public never sees. And if that's true, then perhaps the biggest mystery isn't what happened to Pharrell Williams. Perhaps the biggest mystery is what happens to anyone who reaches the very top and decides they want to stay there. What do you think about this story? Do you believe Pharrell Williams simply evolved as an artist and businessman over the years? Or do you think there's more to his transformation than most people realize? After everything you've heard today, where do you stand? That's what makes conversations like this so fascinating. There are always different perspectives, different interpretations, and different pieces of the puzzle that people notice. Some viewers see a creative genius who successfully adapted to an ever-changing industry. Others see signs that reaching the highest levels of fame comes with compromises the public rarely gets to witness. Now I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell us your opinion. Do you agree with Katt Williams' view of how the entertainment industry operates? Or do you think people are reading too much into Pharrell's journey? What moment in Pharrell's career stands out to you the most? If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more celebrity news, entertainment stories, industry rumors, and deep dives into the biggest conversations happening in pop culture today. And don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss an update when a new video drops. Thanks for watching, and before you go, answer this one final question. If you reach the very top of the industry, would you protect your success at all costs? Or risk everything to stay completely free?